Everyone, I'd like to welcome the City Commission and the Planning Board and our guests and the public to the joint meeting of the City Commission and the Planning Board on June 16, 2025 here in the Department of Public Works at 851 South Eaton. It is 7:30 p.m. and would you please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, Ms. Brown, would you please call the roll?
Thank you. Mayor Therese Long.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Quentin Ballard.
Here.
Commissioner Katie Schaefer. Here. Commissioner Andrew Haig.
Here.
Commissioner Brad Host.
Here.
Commissioner Anthony Long.
Here.
Commissioner Jason Emright.
Here.
Planning Board members Janelle Boyce.
She just stepped out of the room, but she is in attendance.
Thank you. Robin Boyle. Scott Klein.
Present.
Duncan Curie.
Here.
Stuart Jeffries. Bert Kosek. Nassim Rami. Daniel Scher. J. Brian Williams.
Present.
Carter Anderson.
He's walking up right now.
And Olivia Benatanzos. Thank you.
Thank you. We are now open to the public for comment on items that are not on the agenda. I see no public in the room, and I do not have a laptop, so I cannot tell you if there's anyone online.
Up there.
Let me see. Yes. So if any member of the public would like to use the raise their hand function to make a comment about an item that is not on this evening's agenda, this is your opportunity. Again, you can use the raise your hand function and we'll call on you. All right, seeing none, we will move to the meat of the meeting, the discussion topics, and I will turn it over to Mr. Dupuy.
Thank you, Mayor Long. Nick Dupuy, Planning Director. Nice to see you all. This is the first of two joint Planning Board City Commission meetings that our ordinance requires us to have a year. Although I like to say, even though it's required, I think we enjoy getting together anyways, so the requirement's just kind of a formality. These meetings are generally a really fun way to converse and coalesce around different planning and zoning issues mainly, but in particular, mostly planning and zoning issues that have a touch of policy thrown in there so that we can get some direction from the policy makers. Admittedly, throughout the course of the last year, and certainly since our last joint meeting, we at the Planning Board, we've been trying to wind down a little bit our little tangent studies, our ordinance work related to the first subject tonight, which is the zoning ordinance update, and what to expect from a project like that. So starting with the things we know that the City Commission was kind enough to grant us $200,000 for this work, which will be live on July 1 of this year. That came out of course, the adoption of the master plan in 2023, the 2040 Comprehensive Master Plan, but since then, the Planning Board has been working on the prioritization, which last June we reviewed together with you all, and then subsequently you all sort of adopted that prioritization matrix that we put together for you all. And generally that will be the basis for our project here, the zoning ordinance update. So what we decided to do, I think just to, as I describe it, get you all at the ground level. We're way up here right now. The RFP isn't even written, but we wanted to make sure you guys had an opportunity to talk with us before we embark on this really important process, hear your thoughts, and try to understand where your minds are in regards to this project. We split it up into three main things here, three really broad topics. One, the first being timeline, and we're specific to say timeline as in the next few months, the short-term timeline. In no way could we guess the project timeline at this point. It's too early, and typically a timeline like that gets fleshed out in the request for a proposal process. But for now, what you can expect is we would hope to have a request for proposals ready in July to issue, and then sometime in August, maybe September, we'd expect to have responses. Of course, after that, through our series of evaluations and interviews at both the planning board and the city commission, we'll hopefully eventually select a contractor. And I mentioned here that once all that work happens, which is a lot of work, we can probably expect to start work on this project in early 2026. As soon as we can, of course, but realistically, early 2026. Moving on, the other thing we wanted to, the second thing I should say we wanted to highlight is that there will be a substantive public process involved in this project. If not exactly the same, very similar to what you experienced for the 2040 master plan. It's very important to get the public's input on things like this, as it is a day-to-day sort of issue that affects day-to-day lives. We expect that, of course, at all of our open public meetings, there will be ample opportunity for input. But beyond that, there will be specific engagements that are designed to get public feedback, both broad and specific. There's numerous stakeholder groups, from government to the community to developers to special interest groups. All those needs that have needs in something like a zoning ordinance will be attempted to be engaged with. I mentioned here that process too, much like the timeline, will be heavily influenced by the request for proposal process. Finally, in terms of best practices, now there are a myriad of best practices that we could go over here, so we tried to keep it high level as not to get too deep in the weeds. But first and foremost, this, much like the master plan, is designed, or zoning ordinances are written to ensure that existing and future development move the community towards that vision that we adopted in the 2040 plan. It is a legal document, so there needs to be a regulatory framework to achieve those development goals and have the legal basis to do so, and it applies the force of law. It's going to be a tool for us to inform all the decisions from the city related to development. I note here specifically, because I feel like it's very important, that when you're updating an ordinance, there's all sorts of external factors that you have to consider, including state and federal law. So federal law being Americans with Disabilities Act. There's lots of case law relating to religious institutions. If we're able to do our sign ordinance, there's tons of case laws regarding sign ordinances. And state law, lots of stuff, anything from solar to short-term rentals, those kinds of things. But again, at a high level, what we're looking in a zoning ordinance rewrite, because it is a legal document, we all know how legalese can read, no offense to the lawyers in the room, but we're looking for it to be intuitive and logically organized, clear, concise, and engaging, and supplemented with graphics and illustrations. We're also hoping that it's modern and in any sort of deliverable, that it's cross-referenced throughout. Our current zoning ordinance is that way, hyperlinks and things like that, so we'd expect that to continue. So we sort of had, I don't want to call it a simple question, but only one question here before we, the rubber hits the road at the planning board and we start to issue RFPs and things, which is, does the city commission have any major considerations that they'd like the planning board to consider during the start of this process? And with that, I suppose I'll kick it back to you, Mayor Long.
And I'm going to kick it to Chairman Klein to see if he'd like to add anything, and then we'll open it up for commission questions and planning board comment.
A lot of kicking. No, nothing from me on this particular topic. I think it's more important to hear from the commission, and if there's anything in particular that you guys would like us to keep in mind as we're moving through the beginning of this process.
All right, I have one question about process, and that is, what is the planning board's role going to be in either helping to write or approving the final version of the RFP before it goes out?
At this point, because we've talked about it extensively, we'd like them to have a major role. Of course, we would be bringing them quite a document to begin with based on, for example, I know the city of Ferndale just recently went out for RFP and did their zoning ordinance, so borrowing from other communities, but also, of course, our best practices is the plan.
Great, because I would want to know that we did not send an RFP out that the planning board did not wholeheartedly contribute to and endorse. So, Commissioner Baller.
So when the first I heard of this was several years ago, and before we had done the 2040 plan, And the talk then was about how the formatting of the ordinance, the user friendliness or lack thereof was a concern. And that it was important to rewrite it, reformat it, make it more user friendly. And so I'm gonna say in my head that that's one goal here. And an important goal, and one that ought to be right out front. More on that in a minute. Bringing up the 2040 plan necessarily means that we're gonna look at changes. So reformatting is not rezoning, but aligning our zoning with the 2040 plan may involve rezoning. I don't know how much. Maybe it's a little bit, maybe it's a moderate amount, maybe it's a lot. I do know that any engagement with the public over those things needs to be really, really, really clear. So, and I'd like to know up front whether 90% of this project is formatting and 10% is rezoning, or the other way around, right? Because it's gonna make a big difference about how we have to communicate, how we have to engage, and whether we're gonna get pushback or not. So that's one thought.
Yeah, and would you clarify that rewriting the plan does not create rezoning? That's a separate process that you have to go through? You have to recommend rezoning?
So the process would be to review the ordinance, and I think what Commissioner Ballard is referring to is we have to bring it in compliance or conformance, I should say, with what the 2040 master plan for land use discusses. Now, that doesn't mean we are going to be making all of the changes that were even contemplated during the 2040 plan. But some of them, with the basic, getting into zoning recommendations from the master plan process, do inherently involve some changes to the ordinance itself. That doesn't necessarily mean that any property would be rezoned. It could mean that, R1 allows this or doesn't allow that, or we change things to increase open space or limit open space, what have you, as part of those processes. It would only be necessary to rezone a property if, for some reason, the zoning ordinance, the recommendations from the master plan require that we add or change the nature of the zoning districts that exist already, at which point a piece of property would need to have a new designation. I have to be honest, I don't know that I really foresee any of that, and I don't wish to make promises right now, but thinking of the master plan, it was much more about cleaning up the uses, making sure they matched with the future uses of the master plan. Perhaps in the residential, we have R1, R2, R3. I think the plan did suggest we should look at, well, do you need all three of those, or are they all really just kind of saying the same thing? If they're all saying the same thing, then we're really not changing anything other than a designation. So is that technically a rezoning? Yeah, probably. We'd have to get Mary involved and all of that. But I guess just to lay it on the table, I don't know that and Nick, help me here, I don't know that I foresee the master plan as calling on us to make substantial changes. If anything, the master plan process kind of showed us that we're on the right path and that we've got cleanup to do, clean up aisle 6 in order to just make sure that we're all moving in the right direction. I don't know if that helps answer your question.
Yes, and now I would say to a constituent who might ask, there's actually not just 2 areas, there would be 3, right? So on the one hand, you have just cleaning up the formatting. Way over there, you have a possible rezoning. But in the middle, you have changes to the rules for certain zones. I'm not going to rezone your property, but I'm going to tell you what you must or must not do with it.
Potentially, yes.
That's pretty significant.
Can
So
be.
I would think that those also would have to be, those changes would have to be handled with kid gloves and the same level of care brought to bear on those.
Absolutely.
May I continue and then I'll be done? I just had one other question for Nick. AI is crazy. I mean, I'm tempted to go back home and plug and just say, hey, rewrite this ordinance. But I don't have the prompts because I don't know what you're looking for. But I would suggest that you play around with it a little bit because you might be surprised at what it can do for you. That's in the process of rewriting the zoning ordinance. Once the zoning ordinance is redone, we're used to things like hyperlinks and stuff like that as like the height of technology. I think by the time this is rewritten, the height of technology will be like in the stratosphere, and AI will not necessarily be a tool for rewriting it, but one for actually using it. And we need to be aware of that and strive to make it as state of the art technologically as possible.
Great.
Commissioner Host?
Before I ask my questions, Nick, are you planning on getting the commission some form of ordinance advice or change with regard to residential housing this summer? I think you've said that you're working on that.
As in outside of this project?
Well, no, maybe it's within this project, because that's my first question to Scott. You're actually going to entertain residential zoning in this consulting job?
We're going to entertain the zoning ordinance, which includes residential.
Okay,
So-
well, thank you. And then, is parking in on this yet? In the
Yes,
RFP?
yes, though I would say the extent of parking is probably going to be far less than what I think is popping around in people's heads right now. To do a parking study for a community the size of Birmingham, to review all of the zoning districts and come up with ideas on whether we should or should not change numbers in itself could be $200,000 in some instances. So I don't want to sit here and tell you that we're going to solve all the world's parking problems. There were aspects of the master plan that talked about residential neighborhood parking and what the city could or could not do about that. It's really more of a policy issue. I don't see that necessarily in the zoning ordinance. We will look at parking at I'll call it a high level, at a per district level, a use level, and say, are there things that scream to us that are out of that are old age ideas or that are out of line with current thinking on requirements, but that's not the intent of updating the zoning ordinance, at least in my
Okay,
mind.
is this not gonna be in the RFP for the first phase, or will it be in the RFP for the second phase? Parking.
So if I can say, Mayor Long, it's obviously very difficult to answer right now, as you might be able to see. But what I'd like to at least remind you all of is when we did our prioritization in our little matrices, I think as a group, literally as in our group, we recognized that parking projects, like Scott mentioned, the residential permit parking downtown, things like that, were very special and niche and difficult projects, more difficult than a simple, I don't want to use the word simple, and post-master plan zoning ordinance update might include. So we're focusing on the major stuff related to the zoning map and those characteristics, and we pulled out major projects like parking to handle separately.
Or is that part of phase two? I mean, I got the impression
What's
there were gonna be
phase two?
two consultants here, one for the zoning and one for afterwards that, you know, would expand on parking and residential, et cetera. Am I mistaken?
I suppose at this point, yes, there wouldn't be a phase 2 consultant. We don't have anything like that planned.
So the project that we have before you, the zoning update, does not include a deep dive into parking. It includes a summary review of our parking, along with making sure that it gets translated into the new format, et cetera.
And
If
it
you
would-
are asking that we had talked about, at some point, a parking assessment for the city being important, I think we all would agree with that, and have agreed with that. But it is not something that is part of anything that you've approved yet. It would be a separate request that would have to come at another time. So I guess, I don't want you to think that we're misleading you here. Phase 2, I don't know where they came from, but I mean, there would be a separate project with a separate consultant at some point in the future if the city determined that it needed to review its parking in that level of detail, to do counting of spaces, to look at all of the decks, and to come forward with a detailed plan of parking.
So, you are going to do residential zoning in your RFP?
Going to do all zoning.
All zoning? Okay, that's wonderful, and it's nice that you keep it open, that we might have a phase 2 on it. I personally am very proud of the planning board for ever even using the word parking. It's a new word, and I thank you.
Mr. Williams?
I think, going back to Clinton's point, and public input, I think my experience last couple of decades is the most controversial thing that we got in zoning changes were in what I call transition areas. So I think that is gonna have to be on the agenda, because the public comments on that extensively. There are some considerations in the plan, particularly as it relates to transition areas, and so I think we're gonna have to pay special attention to that and get a lot of public involvement in those areas. And we already have, in fact, we've already had input, or how shall I say this, negative input about some of the suggestions in the plan. So we're gonna have to approach, and I think the transition areas are sensitive because they border between commercial and residential, and it gets both sides of the equation excited. And we're gonna have to deal with that. And any change we know in this city will cause some angst. So I would simply say that's where the public's gonna have to be involved. Just an example.
Scott?
And our intent is gonna have to be to have a very wide umbrella commentary and proper notice. I think that will be important. And depending on how what we actually get back from the consultants and how to proceed from that point, we're gonna have to come to grips with. It's not gonna be a simple process. I don't want anybody to think it's gonna be. It's gonna be, if there are changes, and my guess is there will be, particularly because we understood way back years ago that one of the intents here was to deal, for the first time in a long time, with the residential areas of the city. Well, by definition, that's where people live. So they're gonna show up. And we want them to show up.
Just real quickly, Commissioner, before you jump in, just to remind everybody that the master plan as adopted in itself recommended very little change
Right.
to any properties in this community. So we're using that word a lot tonight, and it's good, but I don't want the main takeaway to be changes coming, because the master plan did not call for many properties at all to have a radically different zoning
Right.
applied to it. the uses were very similar, and we were talking more about the quality of life, the aesthetics, and the things, as I said earlier, about we've got R1, R2, R3 that all do the same thing. Why do we have an R1, an R2, and R3, for instance? So let's just make sure we're all very clear that we're not, the focus of this project is not to rezone or change the zoning of a bunch of different properties around the city, because it's not in the master plan.
Commissioner Haig?
It may be semantics, but I've heard several times it said recommendations from the master plan, and then must bring, where's the effect of it? Must bring change requirements to. It sounds as though a recommendation becomes an imperative after the approval of the master plan, and that's something that sounded strange. Because I heard it's, I don't want to pick on you, but you said it 3 ways, and started with shall, and ended the sentence with will, or must, or, and so it just scanned strangely. It sounded like it was a foregone conclusion. Whether that's how you meant it or not, that may be a totally different thing. So it may just be me calling out a semantic difference. It is what it is. The process is to go through the process. I just wanted to observe that. Commissioner Bowers' point number 3, very valid. When you bring up things like R1, R2, R3, the only thing that would concern me there is to think about, not necessarily to preclude making any change, is that if there's something in an R1 and then it becomes an R ABC, do we suddenly create a whole series of existing non-conformings? And then what happens next? Because then the Board of Zoning Appeals is going to get involved. We're going to end up with yet more non-conformance approval for this, non-conformance approval for that. Because how can we not approve something that was approvable under the previous and now is different? So just things to think about with very great sensitivity. And I'm sitting next to an attorney right now, so I'm pretty sure there'll be an awful lot of legal sensitivity put into it. Other than that, when it gets to things like the modifications, the one thing that came out of the master plan that one of the things that stuck with me when it comes to the zoning harmonization, I would say, rather than rezoning, is probably a better way of describing it. I really liked the point in the master plan where it talked about trying to keep harmonization of districts and neighborhoods, because we do see development that is very out of keeping with the character, and it might be in keeping with a different neighborhood. I'd like us to try and monitor that in some way, shape or form without being too draconian about it, because it does really change the perspective of a given part of the city, in my opinion. And that would be very nice to get that constructed in a manner that would be equitable for people that live in those areas, but not create disharmony.
Commissioner Long?
My concern is the process. Who's the consultant? Are there consulting firms out there that just do zoning? And do they have legal as well as experts in zoning? Who we send an RFP to needs to be given a lot of thought. And I know there's other communities that have done it. It is not my area of practice, but the process of doing that, the legality of what Commissioner Haig just described. All of a sudden we have a bunch of property. How you go about doing it. I mean, the process is to make this a more user-friendly use of the zoning laws, which is one aspect of it. The other is legal, to make sure that we don't put our foot in it and cause more problems than we're trying to solve. And number 3 is also getting the recommendations to bring us up to date with current zoning laws. And I think my biggest concern is who you're sending your RFP to, and what that firm has to offer. And it's got to offer more than just somebody that says, yeah, I do this, like a consultant. Like, it's got to be somebody that has some legal attachment to it. It's got to have somebody that's done this before. And then I think I would suggest that we identify the areas that the properties, if you will, or areas of properties that may have a change, and get your arms around what that is first. Because from a public standpoint, if you can come back and say, it's only like 1%, or it's 30%, because your response from the public is going to be vastly different between those 2 percentages, or wherever it falls. And so again, the process is what I'm most concerned about, and who we use.
Commissioner Schaefer?
I just have a quick comment along those same lines, like, do you contemplate areas where you, like, may have substantial rule changes, where you'll create some of these, opportunities for legal nonconformance for people from the past? So that's one question as you're going through this, like, do you know low-hanging fruit where you wish to make a change? And if you do, then I agree that, like, the residents need to know, and I think also to communicate what this is and what it isn't.
Right.
Because I think when people get word of the zoning update, all the little antennae go up of like, oh, the city's, the master plan is done, and now they're coming around the backside and they're gonna change the residential properties into something. So I think communicating what it isn't is as important as communicating what it is. So as you go forward, I think over-communicating is always better, and making sure that people understand what you're not doing, which maybe is counterintuitive.
Super.
Yes, your point that you just made, which was that you don't contemplate a lot of change, is a good one.
Yes. And again, like I said, the master plan did not call out for huge swaths of change. So I know that's a subjective phrase, and huge, it means different things to different people. A couple of just quick points to wrap up. Commissioner Haig, I apologize if, as the engineer in me, I go in and out of the language a bit. Let me just state that what my understanding is, and this is why we'll have the city attorney involved and others. My understanding is that the land use map that was included in the master plan is something that we must follow, okay? But it's a land use plan, not a zoning map. It's our job to interpret that and align our ordinance with the uses of that new land use master plan, or map, pardon me. The rest of the master plan has recommendations in them. Those are just that, recommendations. And it's our job and your job ultimately as policymakers to determine whether or not those recommendations get folded in after further study, and if we do fold them in, if we're doing it in a manner that is following the requirement that our land use map and our zoning ordinance align, okay? So just to clarify, that's where there is a difference. The master plan itself, the whole document, is not something that we must do every single page of in order, checking every box. But there are elements of it that we do need to follow, which is the map itself. Commissioner Long, the way that I have seen this work in the past has been, there are a handful of firms in each community, some national, some local, that do zoning planning work. They represent, they work with communities around the state. They do this. So those are the type of firms that typically would be involved in a project like this. Some are architectural firms, but they're mostly planning-oriented firms. I have seen some communities have the team include outside legal as part of the team, and I have seen other communities not. And that's really been a kind of a community-driven thing. At the end of the day, if you don't mind me saying so, I do think that the city attorney's opinion at the end of the day is going to be more important to you than the opinion of an outside counsel that comes in because they're working, part-time on a project for your zoning ordinance. So I think it's a great suggestion and one we should talk about further and figure out where the comfort level of this city would be in that regard. But typically, I've seen it done both ways.
Commissioner Emerine?
So a couple points. I want the community to know and the commission to know that our staff, our planning board, is the best in the business. So having these people guide the process is key to this moving forward. I see a lot of other communities, and Birmingham is blessed to have an excellent planning board, an excellent staff to help us through this. So I just want everybody, particularly the public, to know that guiding us through this, these people are in the business. They do this every day professionally, although some of you are retired now, like attorneys, engineers, designers, you name it, they're all on the planning board. And it's amazing No other community has that, at least in Southeast Michigan that I've seen. So, thank you guys for doing all that. In terms of reformatting, I feel like that was kind of glossed over maybe a little bit. I think it's been talked about before, as Mayor Pro Tem Baller said, that's super important. The Birmingham zoning ordinance is hard to get through, and unless you're Nick Dupuy who sits through it every single day, it's not easy. So for people that are property owners or developers or whoever, just trying to get through the basics is complicated, which probably leads to a lot of phone calls for our staff. So I think reformatting is super important. I'm not going to touch on the public process other than the fact that, Nick, the way I read this and the way it was described, it sounds like the planning board and the staff will kind of, in the RFP process, dictate the public engagement process. And then whoever the consultant is will come on board as part of that RFP and execute that plan that the planning board and staff will create. Is that accurate?
I think that's fairly accurate, plus maybe a little bit of their professional expertise as well mixed in, suggestions, things like that.
And for Commissioner Long, I actually was going to say the exact same thing that Chairman Klein just said regarding the firms. Like, I'm not going to repeat it, but everything he said is spot on. So there's the usual players that I expect to apply to this RFP, and we'll see if that happens. So anyways, that's all. Thank you.
All right, any other comment on this issue of envisioning, reformatting, redoing, updating the zoning ordinance?
I'll be able to check that out.
Any public comment? You can use the raise your hand function if you'd like to make a remark about the reformatting the zoning ordinance. Okay, I see none. Then we will move on to our next agenda item, outdoor dining platforms. Mr. Dupuy?
Okay, thank you. A very different subject. But one I mentioned earlier, we're trying to wrap up a bunch of stuff at the planning board so we can get started on this zoning ordinance update. But something that's been brewing in the background are these outdoor dining platforms. Understanding that we just adopted our somewhat fresh now outdoor dining ordinances in 2023, similar timing to the master plan. There was a bit of a lull, and now there's been a bit of a bull rush of outdoor dining platforms in the city. But generally, we've had outdoor dining for a very long time. I mentioned in my report almost 3 decades. I think the vast majority of what we get are very well done, beautiful, engaging outdoor dining facilities. We're lucky to have as many as we do. They're typically found in the spring, summer, early fall months. There are, of course, date ranges for platforms specifically April 1 to December 31. So, of course, as our dining scene, if you will, has evolved, people seem to be exploring outdoor dining platforms as much as your standard sidewalk facilities. I think for a while there, at the onset of our outdoor dining ordinances, when we first adopted those rules, outdoor dinings were a little new, a little expensive, a little bit of the Wild West. You never really knew what to expect out of them. But as we've seen them work and work really well in some cases, I think more people are leaning that way as opposed to sidewalk facilities or, say, via facilities. So I know in my report some data that currently this year there's 48 food and drink establishments that have a permitted outdoor dining facility, and 15 of those are on platforms. I note here that that's about 25, plus or minus one, give me some slack on that, parking spaces on street. And as I mentioned, there's a bit of a bull rush. We just, in the last 2 or 3 months, received applications for 3 more platforms, 2 of which have been approved, 1 of which is still in the process. So at this point, in order to aid our reviews and sort of our decision-making processes, currently in the ordinances there are no caps, there's no limits, there's no real thought tree to take us through when it comes to the number and placement of these platforms. So we're here to sort of get an idea of, are you seeing the same things with these outdoor dining platforms? Are you finding that you might like us to study sort of a cap, if you will, or some sort of limit, whatever that limit might be, on outdoor dining platforms. I do have, since the planning board asked for it, can see over there, just a very simple map. And some of them, the platforms are exaggerated, so it doesn't literally take up this much landmass. If I zoom out a bit, that's all of Birmingham, and you can see the black dots and where they're collected. Heavy downtown. Downtown, as you know, stretches all the way up here and all the way down here, but they all, save one, exist in what you could consider the core downtown. And there are some little areas that are becoming hot spots. Hamilton Row has become quite a hot spot for outdoor dining platforms. Pierce Street, you know, if you include Townhouse, is becoming a bit of a hot spot. But it's just a good visual representation of where these decks are. I thought it was also interesting to represent it graphically, because when you see the numbers and you see 15 to 48, 31%, oh boy, that's kind of a lot. Graphically, it may not feel as much as the data would suggest. So I wanted to present you both forms just so you can get a good idea. I know you're all in town a lot too, and you've seen them and you've felt them, even dined on them. So what we're looking for you all today, in terms of questions, and I use the word wish to direct the planning board. I know there's no direction being given at these meetings, perhaps in the future. But do you wish to, instead of direct, thesaurus.com, help me out here, ask the planning board in the future to study the number or density or locations of these outdoor dining platforms? And if you do, what sorts of major considerations should be taken into account?
So I'd like to turn it over to Chairman Klein and introduce one more variable. I think besides number, density, and location, I think adjacency is important. And Chairman Klein, I were chatting before the meeting on the meeting last week on the 11th. You reviewed both Morrow and Tuda, and I thought that they both raised interesting issues. Tuda would displace a handicapped parking spot, and you raised excellent points about the legality of doing that when the platform is not there. And Morrow had issues about taking over the space between spaces that we allow for maneuvering, and I don't know if you'd like to summarize both of those. I think both of those things need to be codified into policy. I know this isn't a discussion about how many bistros we have, but at some point, I think you might want to consider if sidewalk dining is available and appropriate, especially like on newly wide Maple, maybe that's what you get. Maybe a platform is not. Just because you want one doesn't mean you should get one. And I think that, so I don't know, Chairman Klein, if you'd like to add some remarks, and then we'll open it up.
Sure, thank you, Mayor Long. Yeah, I don't know that anybody on the planning board would come in here today and tell you that we think we have a major problem with outdoor dining. So we're not fretting and concerned. However, 4 decks on Hamilton Row, we get the plans, 2 of which came, I think, within a couple of weeks, and we just start to say, it's an awful lot. And so our antenna just went up. It just seemed like something we should at least discuss. Implication for barrier-free spaces, implication for how many spaces should you get? I mean, if there are 15 establishments that are using 25 spaces, some are taking more than one. Do we want to do that? Do we care? I know we've had some residents and some commercial property owners come and complain about the loss of parking directly in front of their store. And I understand the concern. I think it's a little bit of an older school notion, and we have parking so much around this community, but it's still a concern. So we just wanted to see if you had started to get twitchy about this topic, or had heard from constituents about this topic, and if there's something you'd like us to start taking a look at do.
My vote is yes, but Mr. Williams.
I think for a long time, when we started, particularly with bistros, we didn't hear from commercial property owners in adjacencies. But I think the chairman has pointed out, we are starting to hear from commercial entities that view the loss of parking spaces near their establishment as a concern. And we're hearing it now, and particularly, I think we heard it recently on Maple.
Yeah.
So, I think you ought to be aware that that appears to be an evolving concern. I would say for the first 10 years we were doing bistros, I never heard a word from any commercial property owners, but now we are hearing it. And it may be because we've got more now than we had then, and it's simple numbers. My view is this is a policy issue for the commission. And that's where the decision needs to be made. Right now, we don't have any in the ordinance that would allow us to say, oh, we have too many on this street, or we have way too many on that other street. So you need to think about this issue. And because I think at some point, and maybe we are there now, it's become an issue for commercial property owners. I'm not saying they're right, because they don't own the public parking space adjacent to their business, but they think, some of them think they do.
Mayor Pro Tem Butler.
So for me, the value in these is their use, right? So if I look at a deck, and I won't use any names, but there's several on Hamilton, and one of them is very busy when that establishment is open. Full, all the time.
Mhm.
Across the street, there's one that's rarely used. I mean, people just, it's not a thing at that establishment to eat outside. There are, I can think of one, again, not using any names, that has 3 outdoor dining spots, and one is highly popular, that's in the rear. The other 2 that are out front sometimes aren't even staffed, like you can't sit there. So, like, what value? We wanted this to provide an experience to patrons, to activate the street.
Yeah.
But if we grant one of these and it's not occupied, it's not doing us any good. It's not doing potential customers of that establishment any good. And, you know, I don't know how you police that, monitor it. You know, I know we got some cameras around town. Maybe AI can help us on that one. I don't know. But, you know, I mean, it's pretty obvious. Like, we could say you must use this. You must staff it. You must at least allow people. I don't want to walk in somewhere and say, can I sit out on the deck? And they say, no, it's closed. You have to go in the back. No, you could do that with your interior space, but don't do it with the space that we're giving you.
Commissioner Haig.
So as far as the actual spaces used, the 26 on-street parking spaces compared to the total number of on-street parking spaces we have in downtown, I don't really have an issue with that because it's a rounding error. To your point about one that would potentially take a handicap parking spot, I'm going to take an awful lot of persuading to take away a handicap parking spot. In fact, I don't think you can persuade me. It's as simple as that. They were hard enough earned, and then with all of the changes to South Old Woodward and the discussion that went on about some of the spots there, we're not taking it away. You want it? Tough. A handicapped person is using it. When I look at some of the points that you raised, quite sagely about reduce width roads and increase width of furnishing zones, I think we need to be equitable in the amount of space that people get to use. So if there is a furnishing zone that is available, so when we go to the south end of South Old Woodward, there are no parking spots for a couple of the restaurants there, but they do have space on the furnishing zone, which I think is appropriate and it's fair. To then have others where there is the furnishing zone available, they need to be using that first before they take parking spots, especially in the very high density parts of the already high density downtown. So I would absolutely support that proposal right there. But then it comes to other things, such as there are certain establishments, through sheer geography of their location, have neither appropriate furnishing zones or parking spots to use. So how do we help them? Because there are others by sheer geography have multiple parking spots for decks, or they have large furnishing zones they can use, and their businesses therefore have the ability to expand to the limit of what they're permitted to expand to, and others don't. So I'd like to try and figure out, and it's not that I have an answer, I don't have a proposal for an answer, but I'd like to figure out how we can try and be equitable as far as we possibly can, and it will be difficult, and I think in some cases it's probably going to be near impossible to do, just because of the geography of the layout, but we need to try. And by the same token, does that mean that we have to then provide multiple parking spots to any given establishment? How about we try and limit the total net outdoor usage per establishment? I don't care if you've got a restaurant license and you can put 300 people in there, and the place next door is a bistro that is limited. Perhaps we need to limit the outdoor so that that remains not overwhelming, that we give everybody as fair a chance as possible. So I'd like to see that brought in somewhere. Like I said, no proposal, but I don't want us to be geographically constraining people that are really trying to get ahead.
Mhm. I think also to think about, to go upstream and looking at the locations for bistros. I mean, right now they come to us and we don't pay a lot of attention to the geographic location.
We have recently with some of them, because there have
Some.
been a couple where we've actually asked them, are you really sure that's where you want to be?
Right.
I can think of two in particular.
And when they get to the planning board, but I think, so to not create adjacency problems and to look at, like I said, if there is a very large furnishing zone, to say to them, we may grant this, but your SWUP is gonna say that you have to use this and not that. Because I'm not sure we want adjacent platforms, and I think that there is probably a density on the street that we don't want to exceed. I know that since the new one at Cafe Origins has opened, and it is probably not wider than, but it just seems, when you drive down now between them and Dick O'Dow's, it feels constraining for traffic. Because they're virtually opposite each other, and then Tuda is asking to be next door in a handicap space, which again, again, maybe you say to that owner when they're contemplating that, this has a handicap space in front, we will not. And so that they can make an informed decision up front about a location they may want to rent in town. But, you know. Commissioner Schaefer.
A couple comments. I don't know how you can make it equitable. That feels like saying, well, you bought a house with a 150-foot wide lot and you've got one with 40 and we have to make it fair for everyone. I don't think you can make it equitable. You operate your business in this location and you're confined, I think, by some of the constraints that are present in that location. I would certainly support no handicap spots whatsoever, so wherever that comes up, if that needs to be written somewhere, or if it's just simply you guys have the awareness to let a business know that that's going to be a hard no, I would fully support that. And then I would think that wherever there's the opportunity to not put it in a parking spot, and use, the sidewalk space or what's in front, that would be obviously preferred. And if you haven't previously consulted a map like this, maybe this is new, to say, hey, these are all coming up, let's put it on a map and look to see where they are. Maybe that's a good first step, to say, okay, Hamilton Row is highly dense, so we're gonna maybe not approve one there. But if you didn't even have this lens to look through when you've been doing this in the past, maybe this is a good start. So I don't parallel park on Maple to save my life. I will park in a parking structure any day than to stop traffic on Maple and try and parallel park. So that's just me, but I presume I'm not alone.
You're not.
I mean, I will take a deck any day over trying to do that. So So maybe there is some shuttling people toward the decks, you know, which is the preference, I think. But speaking to businesses that you're hearing them pipe up, I think when you hear them pipe up, that tells you there's maybe a problem. So maybe it's a percentage of parking spots within a block can be used, or I don't know if that makes sense. If you're applying, you know, some kind of condition, you do it by block and say we can't use more than 30% of the parking spots in this block. So those are my general thoughts, but.
Commissioner Long.
My concern, again, is fairness. If you're gonna put a number on it, then I think you gotta go back and reassess everybody for the next year. And reassess everybody and look at it fairly, because if you all of a sudden say, we have 25 and we're not going over 30, I think you could have some problems there. Legally, I think you'd have some problems there. And the last thing you wanna do is have people here invest in a business with the anticipation that, well, my neighbor or the restaurant across the street or whatever has one, and then all of a sudden you say no because we're capped, or no because it's a handicap, which I completely agree with you. And so the process needs to be fair. These outdoor dining platforms are hundreds of thousands of dollars of investment, and it's not just the investment in them, it's the putting them up and tearing them down and storing them. And that's a $300,000 or $400,000 thought process. And if, yeah, I can give you three restaurants right now that fit into that category. They are, you know, they are expensive, and then they're paying for the parking spots as well. And, you know, so the thought process is fairness. I agree that at a certain point, in a year from now or 5 years from now, when we have black marks all over the map, not just what we have now, you know, it's going to be an issue. At some point, it's going to be an issue. But the fairness component of it is going to drive whether we have other restaurants coming into Birmingham or deciding to go elsewhere. And maybe we have enough restaurants. I don't know. But I think it's a consideration that you can't just all of a sudden say, well, they're filling up, and so, you know, we're not gonna, because these are permitted every year, I assume, correct? So every year, you know, doesn't mean you're gonna get it next year or the year after or what have you. And then you have some restaurants in town that, you know, have these bump outs. I've heard a lot of discussions about, well, why did they get a bump out? Why does Townhouse have it? Why does this restaurant have it? They don't have to go through this process. They don't have to build their own platform. They don't have to pay for the parking spots. Why should they be given a leg up? These platforms, in certain instances, also throw off hundreds of thousands of dollars in income while they're up for a restaurant. And that's a financial consideration of, are we gonna be here or are we gonna be somewhere else? And, you know, and I love the platforms. I love outdoor dining when it's not 95 degrees outside. So I think that there's a lot of thought process that goes into that if we're going to limit the spaces. And for example, the handicap spot, I would hope that the person who's thinking about putting a business in finds that out before they sign a lease, before they start building out their place, because they weren't told that you're not, like Commissioner Haig said, we've said a couple times, are you sure you want to be there? Because, you know, it may not be a good idea for you to be there because of the handicap spot there. Maybe you want to choose somewhere else in town. I think those are the type of thought process that we need to, as a city, because we want good business owners to be in the city. We don't want people leaving. And I can give you some other towns where people are leaving. Royal Oak is one of them because of their parking is a mess. My office, I walk to all the restaurants there. My office is there, and I've seen the turnover in the last 15 years of lots of empty storefronts to all full storefronts, and now I'm seeing empty ones again. And a lot of it was driven by the parking and the miscues with that. So the breathing city that we have is literally a living and breathing thing, and we need to be careful with how we make these decisions. And that's what we all do, but that's what the planning department does. So I think you need to keep that in mind if we're gonna start limiting numbers, which I agree. You know, you get on some of the streets, you get on Hamilton, there's a lot. It's a lot there.
Commissioner Emmerine.
I think the first question, correct me if I'm wrong, Nick, was should the planning board look at this? you're asking us, my answer to that ask is yes. I think it's pretty clear that everyone's saying that, but no one's flat out said that, so I'll say it. I'd be curious to know, I don't need to know now, maybe for when the planning board discusses this, what the number of decks is. You said 48 right now. What's that look like over the last 5 years, 10 years?
Oh.
What's that chart look like? Don't need to know now, but talk to the planning board about it. Like, what are we talking about over time? We talked about number of spaces. I agree with Commissioner Haig. 26 doesn't move the needle for me. I think it's negligible, but should we talk to the APC about that or not? I don't know. I'll let you guys decide that. I think it's pretty negligible. Lots of talk about the ADA parking space. I agree with everyone. I don't think it's a good idea, but maybe consult with the city attorney on state law. Make sure there's no problems there. That's something that we should look at. And then before Commissioner Long mentioned fairness, I said who goes first? What are the legal issues involved? If this guy's already got his and then next door, so adjacency, the planning board should look at that 100%, not just total count, but if this guy gets it, then does that mean the guy next door is screwed? And is that for 1 year? And then what happens the following year? Is it whoever submits their application first gets it, or how does that all work? I have no idea. I'll let you guys try to figure that out. And then the last item is what Commissioner Baller said about if it's not being used, what are we doing? 100% agree with that. So I don't know how you manage that or enforce that. So.
Slow.
Empty platforms look horrible, I think, and if they're causing other issues, then we should do something about it. So that's it.
Commissioner Baller.
Yeah, I'm looking at the map, and at the corner of Bates and what you have Ring Road there, you're missing the whole big outdoor dining with slice, shift, and sidecar.
This is just
It's
platforms.
just
Platforms.
This is
Yeah,
just
that's the
platforms.
one.
Okay,
I was
all
actually
right.
wondering if we could get a second one that showed the furnishing zone dining as
Yeah.
well, because that's
Yeah.
when I referenced South Old Woodward
Right, so
earlier.
there's
Okay.
48 outdoor dining,
This is
15
good.
are platforms.
This is a great pictorial. Don't misunderstand
Yeah.
what I think he's saying and what I was getting at as well. This is great.
Okay.
Maybe make them red dots for the furnishing zones or something.
So I had a couple other. One is, one concern or question would be, if we change the rules, are we grandfathering the existing ones in, or are we changing the rules for them too? I don't know if anybody here can answer that, or it's a legal question.
That's another legal question.
Right.
The board should look at.
Considering their permit is issued annually, I don't know that there's much of a question.
We have to approve the stops each
Second
year.
comment is, forgive me if this is, I'm not sure it 100% disagrees with you, but I don't see it as our role to level the playing field. I mean, I think we have to have rules and apply those rules fairly, but, you know, there's all different kinds of spaces that somebody can rent. They can rent one that has zero potential for outdoor dining, or they can rent one that's got huge potential. It's up to them to investigate what the possibilities are, and it's not up to us to create opportunities for them or see that this guy doesn't have a whole lot and that we ought to do something for him. Well, he should have thought about that when he rented the place in the first place. The last comment is, we're doing pretty good with our own, with discretion, right? And nobody's yet, like you said, nobody's saying there's a big problem. So, I mean, I'm not sure we need to make a bunch of rules. You know, maybe there's a couple rules that we settle on that are pretty important. But I think we're all, you and us, I think we all weigh in on these, don't we? Does the city commission, did we approve the TUDA and the?
No.
No. Why is that? Is there no SLUP involved in a
No.
dining deck?
Not if they're not if they don't serve alcohol, no?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Really? Okay, so that might be something. So what I was gonna say is that we together as a group do a pretty good job of, you know, using our discretion to approve or deny one of these, and I think I would like that to be the case on all of them. I think selling, whatever we're doing with TUDA and Origins. TUDA serves no alcohol?
No.
What if they go out and get a license? Then have there been cases?
I would think you'd have to approve that.
Then we'd have to approve it.
Right.
I might argue that if there's a parking space involved, we ought to be looking at whether there's alcohol or a slup or anything involved.
I hear exactly what you're saying, and I think this has been really valuable input. But it shows how many different sides to this discussion there are, right? Because no one has said anything inappropriate or out of line, and there's just all these different things to deal with. One of the things that I think that the planning board has been trying to do lately too, you said something about, being cautious and, not having to go out and do a whole bunch of regulations, is we've been realizing, final site plan, preliminary site plan, SLUPs, these cost a lot of money in fees. They cost a lot of money in hiring consultants if they're doing it right. And with these decks in particular, there are a lot of these businesses that are, fine, if you've got a 500-person restaurant, great, you can foot that bill. But if you're selling coffee and bagels, spending $12,000 every year to get an outdoor dining deck might not pan out those numbers. So we're trying to be maybe a little more sensitive to what can we do to try and help smaller businesses just get through the process without all of the added surcharges. I don't know if that's going to be possible. All I would do is ask for you guys to consider that perhaps in the future. Is there policy changes with regard to fees or how things are done for certain businesses that you'd like to take a look at? It's not really our bailiwick, but I think it's a valid point for some of these really small businesses trying to go up against some of the much larger competition.
Well, and on that point, that's where you run into problems, where that's the argument that's made. I agree with you that we don't have to facilitate everybody, but we have to roll these out in a somewhat fair fashion. And if we don't, we're gonna keep our city attorney super busy.
So, again, maybe part of it is permitting of bistros in the first place for adjacencies and densities on streets and things like that.
I don't want
Mr.
anybody
Williams.
to leave thinking we haven't pushed back a little bit on Toyota.
You have.
Toyota. So we urge them to get to the sidewalk. One thing that the city commission has done is the sidewalk on Maple is wider than it used to be. And so we're hopeful with our planning director that will bring this back to us with increased utilization of the sidewalk. I've been at this long enough to know that originally Starbucks was proposing to go out in the street. And we said no. And somehow they've managed to survive without using a deck in that location. So I think we're gonna be equitable, but I think we want to, if there's space available in the furnishing zone or next to the building, in my view, even better, if you have a wide sidewalk, that's where we ought to be looking, instead of a deck, particularly on a street as busy as Maple. And so that's what we've done. If you watched the meeting last week, that's pretty much where we're headed. So I think we're gonna try to be fair, but let's use the space that we have that doesn't cause as many problems from a traffic standpoint and parking standpoint any more than we really need.
Right. I remember Starbucks, everybody decided it was a hazard.
Yeah.
Even the police were like, not at an intersection,
Well, that was a quick no.
Yeah.
And yet somehow they've survived
And thrived.
and they've got seats outside and pedestrians get by. But it's in part, we've increased the size of or the square footage of the sidewalks along Maple, so we ought to be using it, in my view.
I had a question for Nick. Of the 48 food and drink establishments that have permitted outdoor dining, you said, 15 have platforms. What percentage of the rest of them could ask, are in situations where they could, show up next week and say, hey, we want one too?
I mean, just to be conservative, because I imagine, because of where restaurants locate, if not all of them, 90%,
Could,
sure. And that's gonna just account for the ones that are at the bump outs, like a Bell Bistro or Paris Baguette, the ones that don't have parking in front of them, would make up the other 10% that can't.
so it's a problem, but it could potentially escalate, so. Another
Sure.
reason to look at it. Any other comments on this topic? Commissioner Haig?
I've heard a majority of commissioners say no to using disabled parking spots.
Sorry, say that again?
I've heard a majority of the
Yes.
commissioners say no to using handicap parking spots.
Yes.
Yeah, well,
So that's definitely.
that was our position last week.
a solid.
So
Well,
you don't
and-
have to
and-
worry, you don't,
I'm
you
I'm
really have
talking
to
as a
worry.
generality,
Yeah.
rather than a specific precipitated generality.
Well, we've got state law issues, as we pointed out to the
Yeah.
applicant,
And so,
in even moving the spaces.
Chairman Klein, do you want to just briefly raise the issue that you raised about the adjacency to the intersection when the platform isn't there?
Well, again, I'm not an attorney and I'm not gonna play one here. But the American with Disabilities Act does have requirements, and of those requirements, there are two documents, one for buildings and on-site private facilities, and one for public rights-of-way, PROAG, which is a set of guidelines, and again, they are only guidelines because ADA does not codify them. But of those guidelines, they do call out that if you're going to provide a barrier-free parking space, to be considered one, it needs to be the closest to the intersection. So if you start to move it, if the deck was placed in that original space, it would still technically probably be the closest to the intersection. But once the deck is gone, you'd have to move it back. And it gets into other practicality. Now, the city of Birmingham, in my opinion, probably has obtained a waiver, an exemption is probably a better word to use, from the design guidelines, because we don't provide the space around those barrier-free parking spaces that really are required. If you really look at those on-street barrier-free parking spaces, if you are in a wheelchair, I don't know how you're getting in and out. Unless you're getting out of a van and someone's driven you there and you're getting out the side onto the street. They're really supposed to have a lot more room for a pedestrian way. That being said, it's done in most major cities this way because there frankly just isn't room. But it does raise other questions with regard to curb ramps. And are they in a practical location that somebody getting in and out of that vehicle can use it? Does flipping a space over one put it in a spot where it's now no longer practical to use the curb ramp to just get up off of the road? So those are the issues that we raised, that we just felt it wasn't appropriate to do in that particular case.
Right, and so the applicant asked if they could explore getting permission from Caruso to use their space instead. But again, pushing back on using the furnishing zone is, yeah, so. So, anything else? All right, well, you have your direction.
Yes, and if I may, Mayor Long, I forgot to mention it. I did bring some show and tell if you want to come by after. I have our current zoning map and our zoning map from the 1930s, just so you can get an idea of what they used to do in right outside of the General Village Plan from 1929. So,
Very cool.
yeah.
The hyperlinks?
Yeah, the hyperlinks and there's a lot of
AI.
allergens. So yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But no, that was it. Thanks everybody.
All right, do we have any communications? Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.